All right, good. Good afternoon. I know I have the unenviable position of being right after lunch, so no one's allowed to fall asleep, and intentionally I'm going to be a bit provocative as we talk, so no offense to anybody from the AGA or from industry, but I will tell you that I'm going to talk about making a value proposition for your device, and I'm going to argue that the vast majority of people that I see in my role that do that do it very poorly. And I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to say that some of the people in the room here have pitched to me at some point, and I think that the value proposition that you're going to make has to be very different now given the changes in healthcare. I should look at how to advance this. Is it? Good. So just in terms of my disclosure, I work for a venture capital firm. I'm an investor there. We currently do not have a GI company that we've recently invested in, but that's my disclosure. It's the nature of what we do. So here's what I'm going to point out. There are a number of people in the room who have the next greatest advance in healthcare, and they're absolutely convinced of it, and like all of us with our kids, are pretty sure that our baby's the most beautiful baby that's ever been. And I'm going to come at this from the perspective not as a GI doc, although I think I have some credibility having been a GI doc for just under 20 years, but from the point of view of somebody who has to invest capital in startup companies. And this is important because the value proposition is what gets people through this funnel. So this is what I do for a living. We have a network of deals that come to us as a venture capital firm. We see about 450 to 500 deals a year. So for those of you who are writing your business plan and your value proposition, for 4 of us on the senior team, we see just under 120 deals a year each. About 350 of those get looked at by someone at our level. And about 250 people actually come and pitch to us. So the pitch is, if you watch Shark Tank, that's what happens when somebody gets up and says, "Hello, sharks, my name is so-and-so, and this is what I have to sell you." About 130 of them we spend time doing due diligence. About 45 of them actually come to Ann Arbor, Michigan and present to our team. And we make about 6 investments a year. So we currently have a $220 million fund. We put about $20 million of capital into each company. So our funds last about 4 years. The reason I tell you this funnel is that if you do not have a value proposition that resonates with one of us, you don't move down the funnel. And if you're looking for funding, it's the reason why for those of the folks on the startup side, it can be a very, very long haul. So my goal is to try to give a perspective of somebody who's been on the side of it, of where I see people make mistakes. So what's a value proposition? I think everybody knows it, but it's really something that's going to make your device, which is what we're talking about today, attractive to the people who are going to buy it. Sounds very simplistic in most ways, and in fact, this is the classic value proposition diagram that's in all textbooks. You have a product, the marketplace has some competition, which is the marketplace offerings, and you think you know what the customer needs, and every startup person I've talked to, entrepreneur, is absolutely certain that they know what the market needs, and if you just fill that center dark portion, you're golden. And that may work in certain places. In medical device and in healthcare, that's not going to work. And the reason for that is there's a much broader ecosystem. This is just a classical kind of bringing a device to market diagram that I took off of the FDA website. And it's not so much the content except to tell you that if you have a value proposition that starts just at discovery and ideation, and you can't talk to me or my partners about the rest of this pathway, you're dead in the water. And if you talk to folks who did med device for a long period of time, there's a lot of, but you don't understand, we've done this 10 times. We're the 7th stent for the left coronary artery. The other 6 did it this way. We're going to do it this way, and we're going to be fine. And my point as we go through this is to point out that things are moving, and you need to anticipate how you're going to handle each of these steps. And if you can't anticipate that and then pivot when you run into the wall, you're going to be in trouble. And so what's my first provocative statement of the day? No offense to Dr. Camilleri or otherwise. I look at oncology products. I look at cardiology products. I look at women's health products. I look at urologic products. And I would say we, and I'm one of them as a profession in GI, I think we're a bit behind. Now, we may not have had the head start that cardiology did, but when I see a lot of GI presentations, particularly early companies, they are not as thought out or as developed in their thinking. And I get but you don't understand, I talk to the other 7 people who are on my medical staff, and they all love the idea. You guys should too. I think we as physicians and we in healthcare often think very focused on the people we know, and I'm going to argue now healthcare is a lot different. So, a value proposition for a medical device. A good value proposition is necessary, but it's not sufficient. I think everybody knows that, but I think even more it's not sufficient than it was even in the past. Using something with a venture capitalist like, but you don't understand, the last company that did it went this pathway and we can just ride on to what they're going to do. That may work. Joe Ferraro is going to talk and give his perspective. In fact, each of the speakers after me is going to talk about a number of things. And I think you're going to see that, yes, it might, but if you're going to come to us and tell us 5 other people have done it this way before, and you can't address the changes going on in healthcare, I think you're going to run into tremendous problems. I think the key thing is not only is the bar higher for all the bars. The olden days, again, 5 years ago, if you had quality-adjusted life years of less than $50,000 per quality-adjusted life year, it was cost-effective. People would think they'd get their device through. That's changing very quickly as we move forward. And the final thing is, when you do your initial pitch and your value proposition, you don't have to have all the answers right, but you have to at least thought of those answers. And if you're going to bring a device to market, I think you very much not only have to have the expertise and the ability to see big picture, but you need to understand the specific needs of all the stakeholders. And I think what's different than the typical consumer-facing product that people do venture investing or they go out to market with is we have a tremendous number of stakeholders, a lot of whom are in this room. There's no specific order here except to say, and I'll make my next provocative comment intentionally, is for a lot of years there was a checkbox. Do I have a good device? Do I have a good clinical trial? Do I have a really good set of KOLs, thought leaders, to be able to get on the podium and talk about my device? Can I get through FDA? And if that was the case, there was a big breath at that point. People were done. And I recently gave a talk that was titled, Your Reimbursement Pathway is Not a Checkbox Item Anymore. It's the most important item anymore. And so who's going to pay for this, which we've talked about this morning? And a lot of this is reiterating things that were said this morning, will be said afterwards. But I want to kind of point out where I see people falling into the hole, which is if they don't know how it's going to be paid for and don't understand the current changes in healthcare, and CGIT can certainly help people to do that, but it's not enough if you don't have a well-developed plan. So what do I think about when we look at a value proposition? And these seem overly simple, but it's who, what, why, and how. So I'm going to take a few minutes and walk through each of these. And the whole idea is as you walk around this afternoon and talk to other people, particularly those from startups, or you talk to some of the venture-backed companies that are more developed or some of the more successful companies, see if you can look for these factors as they discuss their things. And when our folks get up and do the Shark Tank in about an hour and a half, I'd listen for these also. So one, who? Who's the buyer? So there's a billion-dollar company out of Michigan called 5 Hour Energy. Okay, they now have grossed about $3.6 billion because in 7-Elevens you can buy 5 Hour Energy. They knew who their customer was. They were able to save it. To sell it seems like a very simple thing. But the key thing is the buyer in healthcare is changing all the time. Who are you selling into? I used the term earlier, necessary but sufficient. In the olden days, if you were a cardiac device company and you had a head of cardiothoracic surgery who wanted it, it usually got paid for and your hospital brought it on once you got through your regulatory requirements. Understanding who the buyer is it a patient? Is it the CEO of the hospital? Is it the physician? And when I say the patient, the whole idea of private pay is a new thing. So one, who is it that I need to sell to, and what is their interest? Because if you look at the people I listed up here, every one of them have a different interest in what they want out of your device. And I just will make a point of the whole idea of the patient perspective has got to be early on in what you're thinking as you move through. The what? What's my differentiation? And this is important because there was a bar for a long period of time that if I did a study and I showed non-inferiority, that I wasn't worse, and I showed quality-adjusted life years that were adequate, I am going to move forward. And I'd argue now that the bar has changed, and we can talk more about it as we go through the other folks in terms of what that bar is, but the clinical data you need, the clinical utility argument that you need to make, the cost savings and the use of the product in the real world showing that it does what it's supposed to do. So not just efficacy but effectiveness are all really important. And when people pitch to us and say, the last folks did a 400-person trial and their data was good enough for approval, that's not good enough. You have to explain where it fits in. The why. Everyone who develops a device, every single innovator I see at universities is convinced that their device is a whole lot better and will absolutely revolutionize all that we're going to do. And I'm not mocking folks, but it's a really deep-held belief, and you see a lot of folks run off the chasm from doing that. You talk to really well-developed programs like Stanford Biodesign that Dr. Shrieker brought up, or what goes on at MIT or otherwise, and one of the biggest thing there is customer discovery and talking to people that are going to give you a different opinion. So my biggest advice to young entrepreneurs is when you go out and talk to 15 people, the person you should think about most is the person who told you this is the worst idea ever and you shouldn't do it. And you have to be able to figure out, was that person just irrational, or do they see something that you don't, and you're now going to spend $3, $5, $7, $9 million, $50 million trying to bring it to market if either the buyers don't want it, the payers aren't going to pay for it, or it doesn't fit into clinical flow, which I think is very important. And I just want to make one point before I go on about the last slide, which is there is a tremendous level of inertia. If I own an ASC, so I came from a 17,000 procedure ASC that we owned when I was still in practice, very busy. We didn't buy new widgets because they were interesting. We bought them if they were going to decrease our costs, increase our patient throughput, or fundamentally change the way we derive patient care. So one of the things now in a very resource-constrained system, you've got to make sure it's not just better, but it provides some intrinsic value you don't otherwise have. Some of this sounds simplistic, but trust me, we see this every day where people pitch and it doesn't resonate. And then lastly, I think you have to think about it. Right now, there are 800 hospitals in 76 different regions in the country who woke up and on April 1st, every knee and every hip they do on Medicare is a bundle. They didn't choose to be in the bundle. They're getting a payment. And they're going to get a flat fee, and across their 1,000 hips, if they overspend, they're giving the difference back to the feds as opposed to making a profit. That's overly simplistic, but I think colonoscopy sounds pretty bundleable to me. Bariatric surgery, pretty readily bundleable to me. And if you have a new widget that adds $7 to the endoscopy case for a small incremental benefit, or $70 to the fee, you've got to think about how that might fit in. And even if you're a nihilist and say we're going to live in a fee-for-service ground for a long period of time, you've got to be able to explain to me, like I said up front, that you can pivot if the market pivots faster than you all anticipate. So, I was an operator in my earlier career in terms of healthcare administration, and I think it's important. When you pitch to us, if what you sound like seems like it's undoable, then it's vision without execution, it's hallucination. It's really nice, but that's why our funnel gets very narrow very fast. That's not to be offensive, but I think the answer is people start a lot of companies and get early funding, but don't get across the finish line because they haven't thought this out well enough. So an effective value proposition tells the story of your device, but a great value proposition that gets funded and has a bigger likelihood of making it across the finish line shows that you have a terrific device, but that it also fits in the real world of healthcare. And if the real world of healthcare continues to evolve, that you can fit there. There are a whole bunch of, so I'm a Detroit kid, there were a bunch of wagon makers who made beautiful wagons to be pulled by horses for a long period of time. And then the car came along. And I think that one of the things, I think it was Dr. Rivas who said, is are we going to have incremental innovation, or are we going to have absolutely really thought-provoking, dramatic change, disruptive innovation in healthcare? And I can tell you, I think in GI, we're going to see more and more disruptive healthcare as time goes on, like we have in other fields. So, conclusions, to be able to be respectful of the time and the other speakers. My thoughts about value proposition, and I'm trying to be a little bit provocative about telling everybody here that I get paid to tell you your baby's ugly. No offense to you and your spouse, but we make our living based on picking the winners and not. So I may have a somewhat biased view, but I think if you don't hear that biased view from everybody, you're either the single greatest inventor of all time, or you have bought into your own press, which is a big concern. So what's a value proposition have to be? It's got to be compelling but realistic. It doesn't mean you can't be optimistic, but you can't be delusional in terms of the numbers you present. It's got to be flexible, particularly with early companies. You've got to show you're willing to pivot. It's got to be relevant to a wide range of stakeholders: FDA, payers, physicians, patients, CMS, private payers. It's got to be differentiated from the competition. Small incremental improvements are not enough. No offense, but it's very hard for even smart folks to differentiate between all of the obesity products out right now. Is that a marketing thing, or is that many of them are too closely related? And lastly, I think now more than ever, you can't just get a device paid for by your hospital because you are a really big referrer. You have to be able to displace what's there and be able to make an argument to do that. So I'm going to stop now. I know we're going to come up for panel. I appreciate everybody's time and look forward in the question and answer session to defend some of the things that I said. Thank you.